Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Third Age Babylon 5 podcast. We are talking this week about Dust to Dust, as you can see, without Meike again, but despite work travels, we've managed to at least get the two of us ready for this time. And I guess I start directly with a synopsis, all right?
Yes.
Okay, so we are picking off almost exactly where we left off with Voices of Authority. We have a little bit of the aftershock of revelations about Clark. And maybe because of that, or maybe just because he's up to his own shenanigans, Bester shows up on the station, once again hunting down dangers to national security and all that jazz as we are used to. But this time around, the crew is a little bit more prepared for his shenanigans. And the thing that he's investigating is dust, which immediately gets us to sort of the meaty side plot of this episode, because the one that is trying to procure some dust is Jakar, and we get a little bit of pretty literal insight into his and Londo's mind. So interesting things are happening. As a small side note, Vir is also making a return from Minbar, where he seems to have had a really interesting time. So with all of that on our plate, there's a lot of things. What are some first impressions that you had?
Oh, yeah, it's actually quite hard to tell right now because yeah, it happened a while since I've watched an episode. So I think my first impression probably was like, oh, this feels familiar. But yeah, that's for different reasons, I think. Because as everybody can see, I have a different background right now. I'm elsewhere. So yes, but a real first impression is that the episode has a good kind of has a good it's picking up the pace a little bit. It has a good plot, and I think really has some moments that go to the core of Babylon 5, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that mirrors my feeling as well. This feels not really like the good old times, but we've seen Bester before. We've seen Vir for the first time in a little while. So it seems like, okay, there are some things happening that are not as radical and strange as maybe the arrival of a political officer on the station. Maybe this is a bit of more of a normal day, which is a nice change of pace. But obviously with all the added flavor of our plots in the background continuing on. And if it's fine with you, I would like to start with the very first scene in this episode, which is sort of the main bit we get about Clark and the whole conspiracy of light.
Yeah, no, actually, I think we have to talk about something else first because I definitely don't think that this feels like a more of a daily life kind of episode. I think really like from the start, this feels more like an episode that is taking us out of this normal more and more, and we are more and more getting into touch with some of the deeper mysteries of the show. It did not feel like such a daily life. Let's just hunt some lurkers episode at all of uh because we're getting so many revelations, literally. Like in this whole trip to Car has, in the end, we get so many revelations of his personal story, and we also see him discovering things in Londo's mind that he definitely needed to know, and then we also get the big reveal in the end that that actually was made on the side. So yeah, for me that definitely does not feel like a daily life episode anymore. I also feel like the soundtrack that was in the background was this like I often mention that when the soundtrack gets this like 80s synthesizer aesthetic, that often is a hint of now we are getting closer to the mysteries of the universe. So that's definitely what it felt like, that we are edging closer to the thing that it is all about. Yeah.
Okay, very very different impression then, because I mean, for me, yes, there are these big revelations and these big implications at the end of the episode, but for me, like a lot of the path leading up to that is very felt a little bit like like for me it was calling back to everyday life still, but that's interesting that like the weight is so different for us here. But I mean, yeah, we will see also as the season goes forward how that plays out. Where maybe for me it starts getting more into this stronger, like tipping into the mystery of everything.
Yeah. Okay. So okay, I mean, for the leaders, it's very weird for me right now because I'm doing it for the first time from my different out here, and I got different time and a different microphone. And yeah.
It also is very unusual for us to have like a slight delay in between like things getting like communing over the internet, so that's unusual. But I mean, nevertheless,
So maybe I should tell maybe I should tell the viewers where I am and why I'm here, because I just definitely not because I moved out or something. But yeah, I'm working.
don't jump to the worst possible conclusions immediately.
Working in the right now, and because most of our visitors might not know where it is. It is a city very far in the east of Germany. It's very close to the Czech border. And I have the honor to work for a museum here. So right now I'm doing an internship at this museum, and for the rest of the year, like it started already weeks ago, for the rest of the year I live here. I have a small room and a shared flat with a few students, and I'm working here, and it's very nice and very interesting. But yeah, that's why we have this different setup, because I decided that for my career I need to move away for a few months. Yeah. So that's why everything's different, and I still have to work it out.
We will, technology is tricky. That's one of the main themes also of Babylon 5. So we will manage somehow with the added limitations this brings.
Okay.
But I mean, yeah, given that the episode has like this very different feel for you, was there something else that you would try, like, want to use as a starting point for our discussion then? Because I'm happy to.
Yeah. What's the starting point you suggested again?
The very opening scene is, this vendor on the Zocalo getting harassed by some Earth Force security until Sheridan steps in and tells, it basically explains to security guards that there is a little bit of freedom of expression still, not immediately, and I just find it interesting because this is picking up right where we left off. He's like handing out little pamphlets that say, "Oh, we should indict Morgan Clark. We should lock him up. This is what Santiago would have wanted." So we see immediately, oh, okay, the big revelation that we had at the end of last episode is like proof of the assassination. People are actually listening to this, which is kind of nice.
Yes, but I also think that there is an important thing that, as Sheridan said there in that scene, and it's not necessarily just this, like, there's that is still like some kind of freedom of speech, or that this is an opinion. I think that is actually not the important thing. I think the important thing is that he says that in no offense against the office of the president, because you can be against the person who holds the position, but not be against the position. And I think this is something that in many different conflicts and in many different contexts people forget, that there's a difference between a position and between an institution and the person who is actually at the moment holding it or working in it. That is very important. I think this is one of the most important things. And yeah, I think also actually, in my opinion, this thing that Sheridan says that in the end mirrors in a lot of other scenes in that episode. We can talk about that, but I think in the way that our characters are grouped here, that so I think Claire has to work with Bester, and how and the car is now kind of group plot with Londo. Actually, I think we can discuss about this aspect in these plots. And what also find really wonderful about that is that this can often be seen, or is often viewed as like a lesson people learn from history. Like especially when you live in Germany and you think about learning from history, this would be like one thing that you realize, that you can be against an order without being against orders in general, or you can be against a person without being against a government in general. But here, what I find so wonderful is that we are still before the Great War, kind of, and Sheridan is already saying that. That's very important, that we have all of these positive things in the world. Still, bad things are going to happen, but we also cannot use all the bad things that happen because, oh, at least a lesson was learned. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. We are not relying on sort of the tragedy to justify this statement. We already have this up front to some degree, right? It gives us this idea of resisting Clark is an important thing to do right now. We will see that things can get worse, but that's not a reason to wait until they get worse to learn that lesson and apply it. No, definitely, I can see.
Yeah. And it's also that we don't need like terrible things in history to happen to learn lessons, because often we try to cope with these things by saying like, okay, at least there was a good outcome, at least humanity learned something. But if you look at it from another point of view, it's also like justifying that, okay, it hadn't happened because otherwise we would have never learned something. And yeah, that's where it gets dangerous, I think. So I like it how they put it here up front.
I think it's like one of these things that in hindsight you like to say to attribute a lot of meaning to tragedies that maybe just don't have any meaning. Maybe there is no thing. And I think that's a very also well established thing, like from even in like basic pedagogy, like terrible things happening to you are usually not the best way of getting anything in your head. Like punishment is not the best motivator for learning, quite the opposite. And I think that same applies on like a larger scale as well. The big horrible tragedies are usually not the best way to take away a big cultural lesson from it. I think a similar like logic is often applied of, oh, well, these wars are terrible, but at least we had all of these amazing technological advances from it, which is like if we at some point maybe we can do a discussion on like the history of science about that, how much this actually holds true. This because especially science fiction loves to play with this idea that, oh, a war happens and suddenly all these cool inventions come out, and I'm a little bit skeptical before we touch on this more. But no,
And yeah, yeah.
but like I said, I think this is something that we could spend an entire extra hour on if we wanted to. But no, I fully agree. This is sort of the meat of what Sheridan is saying here. The scene also stuck out to me because it feels like it's a nice little bow on a sort of development that Sheridan has been going on, because to me this is one of the scenes that really felt like season one to me, like walking around the Zocalo and commenting and like intervening directly into like some like squabble that is happening. This feels like a very Sinclair thing to me. And then I think back to early Sheridan, and early Sheridan is the guy who's overwhelmed by all the bureaucracy on his desk and, tells Garibaldi, I don't want to hear about the petty crime that is happening, just deal with it. I just want to I just want to be on my ship and give my commands and not deal with all of the government part that is happening here. And I think to me this is standing out because in light of everything that is going on with Clark and everything that is going on with Night Watch and Earth for Security right now, I think it's really important that Sheridan has moved on from this. He has learned some lessons to appreciate that he is not just a military leader, he's a governor, and he deals more with the everyday lives of people, and so now he is more the kind of leader who does concern himself with the little things and who does take time out of his day to, deal with these kinds of complaints about security and stuff, something that I would imagine a few months ago he would have just had Garibaldi deal with and didn't want to look with this. And to me, that's just kind of this indication. Sheridan is a good man, but Babylon 5 is also the right place for him to be and learn these lessons so he can become a good resistance fighter against Clark, for the lack of a better term.
Yeah, but I mean, that's also a point. I don't think he is any more fond of all of these little tasks that he has on the station or of any kind of bureaucracy that this job brings. I think in this special complaint, he's really much more interested in because he has a personal problem with Earth Force at the moment. You know?
I mean, he definitely has this problem. I still, personally, I think there is a connection here. I don't think that the Sheridan that we see arriving in the station in the beginning of season 2 would be as proactive. I think of Sheridan in season 2 in the beginning, and I think, oh yeah, he still would have been against Clark, and he would have been interested in this in this conspiracy theory, but I don't necessarily see him, being so close to the grassroots of resistance against that, if that makes sense. He felt to me initially more like somebody who just doesn't want to deal with all of that and just kind of pushes it on the side rather than tackling it this head on. But that's just my impression.
Yeah, I didn't give that part much thought at all because it was just a few minutes and we still have a lot of things to discuss. Yeah, I mean, which ones of the main plot would you like to continue?
I think maybe let's start with Mr. Bester's arriving, because then the whole investigating does kind of naturally leads us into the Londo and Narn shenanigans, I think.
Okay.
Anything about Bester's arrival that stands out to you most? Because I have notes on like one or two things here, and for example, like do we want to spend some time talking about their whole discussion? Oh man, Bester is here again. We know exactly how this goes. We need to come up with a clever plan. And then also Ivanova's consideration, well, maybe we just blow up the guy and the problem isn't there anymore.
Yes, I think we have to talk about it a little bit because, yeah, I mean, when we sit there at the table and, yeah, and the Neb is copying that, and then Friedman says that he cannot support murder. Um, and Ivanova really just, I mean, I don't know, at that moment I thought maybe she wasn't even completely serious, but just because somebody had already pointed out that murdering Besta is kind of not a good idea.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting that Garibaldi is the first guy to bring up that maybe we just have to kill him, which for me feels completely in character. Yeah, he would be the guy who's like, the PsiCop. He probably just has to die. Don't see any other option. That makes complete sense to me. It also makes complete sense to me that Franklin just takes this very principled stance with like very little consideration of the circumstance, just says, no, I'm just not going to do this. And yeah, for Ivanova, it starts out as this almost, well, maybe we just hurt him a little bit, but I think I'm really surprised every time how serious she then gets with this. And like, as soon as she actually dismisses the control room group and starts arming the system, and like in her head goes through what the plausible deniability looks like of, oh, I keep saying the defense grid is having weird issues, so I could just have this mistake. And yeah, then Sheridan having to talk her down from this. I think it's a really not out of character moment, but it really shows how much her composure cracks on this particular issue, on the whole telepathy, psychops coming in, that this is really the hot, sore point for her.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also always sort of surprised every time because every time I watch that scene, I'm surprised like, oh, that was in there and this early. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's especially kind of knowing where things go. It's interesting that we get this sort of miniature version already. Yeah.
Uh, yes, but I think we should maybe yeah, I think that yeah, for example, this case setup is driving me crazy. For example, what I've been noting down as well is that Garibaldi complains that that Esther always when he arrives basically said the same thing, but there is a threat to whatever security escorts or something on the station, and Garibaldi is joking like, haha, as if we are going to delete this every time. And then it's cut as the person running crazy. We're good of that because I love it even more when considering that in the end we find out that the drug is actually being produced by Sakor. So it is literally this cut that we have seen there, and this doubt of Garibaldi and this cut that we've seen there actually shows that Sakor is manipulating the reality in the way that they want, not just by being telepath, but also by having all of these secret missions. So yeah, this cut just really shows how they always seem to be one step ahead, I think.
Yes, and there is a small scene in this episode that is a small diversion, but I noted down here it's really it stood out to me that this methodology of we manufacture an issue and this is our excuse to keep interfering and keep coming back and keep causing problems. This is exactly how Bester operates, but then we have this small little scene where Delenn and Lanier try to mediate a conflict between the Drazi and the Centauri, and it all boils down to the Centauri kicking in the door and saying, "We need this planet, and this is an issue now. And why are you not compromising on this? We just need a buffer zone." And it's kind of exactly the sort of same thing. Like the Centauri are creating this issue, fighting this war on many wars, and then complain that nobody works with them to resolve the issue. And it is just an excuse to keep coming back and keep pushing this issue. And I kind of like that we have this little parallel in here of this is how the bad guys of the episode kind of operate. They generate concerns and problems that they then need to solve, and then you have to work with them to achieve this, which is makes it all the more satisfying that Vesta does get a little bit of comeuppance from first Ivanova's little stunt, but then also the whole, haha, we have more telepaths than you. Nothing, I really like the quote, there's nothing better to ruin a Psychop's day than an even playing field.
I think the scene that you just mentioned between the Drazi and Londo actually needs a bit of attention, especially in the light of now of recent politics. So what do you want to put that in there, or do you want to continue the PsiCop plot for now?
I think let's make the little diversion because it's a very topical thing. Let's get that out of the way first.
Yeah, because I actually found it interesting the exact word buffer zone was used in that episode. From the last time I've watched it, in a different political climate, actually, I missed that word. I liked it there very much because, yeah, it's just such a crazy thought from my point of view and from our point of view. I think to have this thought of to be safe, I can demand buffer zones. So buffer zones from this like imperialistic point of view are a territory that I don't want to reign over. So it's territory that does not need to belong to my nation, that does not need to belong to my political power, but it's zones that have to promise a certain level of neutrality. So it's a very, 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 yeah, well thought through, very fine power play that nowadays we are used from Russia, for example. Because I think for many people who look at Europe right now, they are not aware that a lot of places that we know now as parts of the European Union, as part of NATO, as parts of our Western world, actually in the past had a deal with Russia that made them buffer zones. And now more and more countries are not on these buffer zones anymore. And these old imperialistic concept of safety that don't work anymore. But also you have to consider that in a buffer zone, potentially millions and millions of people live who then suddenly have to be neutral to things that they probably don't feel neutral about. It's like Austria or Yugoslavia were buffer zones, and that Yugoslavia was a buffer zone actually surprised me because that also means that the influence that Russia, that the Soviets had in Yugoslavia was weaker than it was in the GDR. And that's interesting to me, at least, because Yugoslavia, for example, is always viewed as a country that was rather futuristic and rather under Soviet control, but it was a buffer zone, so it only had to pledge neutrality and could do whatever they wanted, while in Eastern Germany, no one could do that. You understand what I mean?
Yes, and I mean that we know that Yugoslavia also has just its own like break with the Soviets. This always very transitional, but this is why I'm bringing in also this concept of you have the buffer zone in the sense of okay, we want to create distance between the two blocks and have more of this neutral-ish territory there. I mean, this is I think Austria you mentioned is a very great example for this. But I want to bring in also this idea. I mean, this is why I also say crumple zone. This idea of there is also just this territory that is assumed to just be sacrificed in any like immediate conflict because it is on the border of the two. And if we're talking about, what does it mean for millions and millions of people on the six Drazi worlds that people are talking about, it's for one, yes, absolutely the assumption this is a neutral territory now that is not part of the two power blocks, which is very strange for them. But it also, for me, carries the implication that if a conflict breaks out, it's gonna be over these worlds. They know that if any of this very tenuous power situation, if this breaks down, the war is gonna be on them immediately. That's also what we see in the previous examples of contested places between the Narn and the Centauri. These are the first places that become the front line in any conflict where the actual bloodshed is gonna happen. And I assume that's also gonna weigh on them.
Yeah, I'm just thinking actually if that's actually. I mean, so for me, when I think of buffer zones, it's actually a new stuff that wars have to happen in these buffer zones. Yeah, it's definitely a new thought for me because I've always more viewed it as a very kind of level of extended slavery, because when you are in a buffer zone, and now I'm talking about real world politics more again, but when you are in a buffer zone and you are a buffer between Europe and Russia, for example, then if you are on territory that Russia wants to claim completely, you have this problem with the wars, I would, for example, say. But when you are in this buffer zone, you have a problem with other political rights, for example. Like in a buffer zone, you could not just, as I said, recognize the human rights, because that would then count as losing your state as a buffer, because you're not neutral anymore. So something very, very, very natural, like human rights or like democracy, then becomes the probable starter for a conflict. So that's why I think in buffer zones, I've always just viewed it more as this extended arm of slavery, literally. And I actually think that not all buffer zones necessarily have to be the place where the conflicts take. For example, also when I think of the Drazi worlds, they actually never viewed it as this place to operate military operations, not necessarily, but more as a place where the Centauri look out for more detailed. And if in this buffer zones, for example, there would be colonies that disagree with the Centauri on too many things, then the war, I would assume, would still take place in the core territory of the Drazi. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I, I, I get the idea. I don't know that this would be necessarily my interpretation of it, but it's then also very abstract, like where wars take place, right? I know all of this is also under the really heavy assumption that the Centauri have any actual intention of establishing a buffer zone, and I'm not just throwing this out there as sort of a buzzword.
Yeah, I was just thinking that we had buffer in the Cold War, we had buffer zones like Yugoslavia, Austria, but also I think Finland and Sweden were kind of neutral. So Russia was always interested in having these neutral countries in between, and the war that we have right now actually then broke out in Ukraine, which was a territory that they actually never wanted to have neutral. So Ukraine was never thought to be a buffer zone, and there we have this war now. So I think that it's still more of a moral and value and power fight in these buffer zones, and the actually escalation doesn't have to be in one, although it can be in one. Yeah.
Anything?
Yeah, that also, I mean, when you hit, yeah, no, actually, when you suddenly live in East Germany, like very, very far in the east of Germany, these things become a lot more important. That's why I'm giving it so much thought, because over here things are different. But anyway, I don't have anything more to say to that scene. Actually, except one thing, to Len's view of of just deeply, deeply personal disapproval towards Londo was just priceless. And yeah.
I priceless is such an interesting word for this because that is not what if we're talking about priceless, priceless for me is Will arriving in his Hawaiian shirt from Minbar. That's absolutely hilarious to me. I love it. Um, but I think this was, obviously it's funny we're having the bright idea of maybe we just need to give Londo a vacation on Minbar to make him better. But I think there is, like, underneath that surface, there is something substantial there. For one, that Will doesn't need Londo anymore at this moment, and still he really cares about him. He really wants to help Londo. He sees this all still as something that is, sure, Londo is responsible for what is happening, but at the same time, I think Vir also has the sense that Londo isn't really in control of what's happening, or is at least not of a sound mind to make many good decisions right now. So he tries to plead for this idea of, oh, can't we get him out of here, away from this position, and maybe in an environment that can help. And I find it like a pretty good insight into Delen's own philosophy, that she says essentially, well, the change that Londo needs cannot come from the outside. It doesn't matter like how much you do there, if it doesn't start with yourself, that's not going to work out. And I personally felt very reminded of like instances of insufferable people going to live with some Tibetan monks for a few years and then feeling very reformed. It just feels like, no, it doesn't matter how remote and holy and wholesome the places you go. It's not going to heal you if you, in your own like mind, don't make any change. That's not the answer to anything.
Yes, but mm, I always have a problem with that, actually, because I still think that people are able to make experiences that really change their view on the world in general. I think that um, these experiences are important, and people are not just the way they are. I think people are a product of experiences. But then also there was Linier in that scene who made a bit more clear that this kind of darkness, that's cannot be cured that way. So yeah, I think it literally depends. But in general, I mean, like a problem, I think I've mentioned that a few times in episodes we've discussed before, that this kind of spirituality that we get from the Minbari is something that in the real world I have a big problem with. That's also something like, in my third degree, I studied a lot of developmental psychology, and that's also a problem I have in general with psychology, where it's always about your own resources and your own thinking patterns. And it's like, it's okay, but I can live in a fucking war zone, or I can live in a fucking dying climate or in a pandemic. And it's just like, okay, but your own natural resources are the key. Like, no, what the fucking hell? It's sort of difficult always for me to view it like that.
I mean, okay, but if that's a difficult perspective, we can just take another perspective. That's also like an option. And I wonder, I think there is another potential like way of viewing this, where Dylan looks at Vir and Vir's experience on Minbar, and Vir is kind of this bright-eyed idealist. And I think for him, Minbar is really quite amazing. But Londo is somebody who has a lot of experience at court and with politics. And Dylan, as somebody who has dealt with Minbari politics, maybe also just realizes, oh, if Londo goes to Minbar, he's going to take one look at the Grey Council and see just how corrupt and like atrophied that part of Minbari society is. So it's not going to help him, because he has just kind of the experience enough to be cynical about Minbari society in this way, the way that she maybe rightly also is. I don't think Dylan views her home world particularly as a place you would go for some kind of enlightenment. She tried that and it didn't work out. They rejected her because she actually believed in the prophecy. So that's probably a bit of a hold up there. But okay, this was like it's such a relatively minor side scene, but we spent a good amount of time on that, which I think is fair. There's some meaty stuff in there, but let's return like circling back to Bester and his shenanigans. Obviously, Bester agrees to take the drug. Bester doesn't want to have Mimbadi hanging around all around, which I think goes a little bit to show his priorities in this also. Like, he doesn't like to take the drug, but he dislikes aliens even more. That seems to be a recurring theme in this episode. Do we want to talk a little bit about the investigation that he has with Garibaldi? Maybe just in terms of like the chemistry of these two characters. They do get kind of paired up in this almost buddy cop comedy scenario, and it takes us some places.
Yeah. First of all, I have to say that in the beginning I mentioned that we get two characters paired up here. One is Dexter and Sinclair, and the others, I think, Londo and Chikar are also paired. And I think that is done on purpose because, yeah, I think they are both paired up in a way that the plot has some questioning themselves and questioning their own positions. And for me, I made a connection there also towards as Harry told us in the beginning. There is a difference between a position and a place and the person who holds it at the moment. And so I think Garibaldi is being paired up with this person that he hates, standing for an organization that he hates, to get a new perspective on, I think, from the perspective of the writer, to probably get into a plot to question the organization he works for and the position he has in, and also the way that he does it himself. And I think also in a way you can later go on to compare Londo and Shakar. And yeah, to the way that Bester and Garibaldi. I've mentioned Sinclair a few times. I'm so confused right now. I always when I said
Oh, well, I'm not
Garibaldi, but
fine.
doing a big work out together, I think it showed that they actually have a lot of their determination and a lot of their way of thinking, a lot of their thinking patterns in common. I think with few moments you realize that they would actually work well together if they had not pledged themselves to institutions that they so it's like, you know what I mean? Like they could work out well together if that's their not would not be psycho. So there's this thing of okay, these people like they're kind of same thinking pattern, they can both be very good cops, but there is this question of loyalty that makes them like the worst enemy usually. That was interesting.
Yeah, they have such a fundamentally different way of placing their allegiance, I think. But I do like how you're saying that for a lot of this we see, and this probably is the most annoying thing to Garibaldi, they work really well as cops together. They are really skilled, and it even goes so far as to kind of disprove this statement from the beginning. Like, our crew very much goes into all of this assuming, well, Bester always feels superior because he has these amazing mind powers, and that's probably all he relies on. And then you take them away and you see, oh no, he's still very good at interrogating people. He's very good at lying and, intimidating people using his uniform and badge. Which he then kind of turns on Garibaldi to say, hey, we are not so different, you and I, right? We just want to do the best for our planet. But I think at the same time, this is also where Bester overplays his hand a little bit, because I think he tries to appeal to something that for Garibaldi just doesn't mean anything when he says, hey, listen, your blood is red, my blood is red, right? We are still humans, we are both of Earth, right? This is some common ground we have. And personally, I don't think Garibaldi gives a damn about that. I don't think Garibaldi would ever say, oh, I must be loyal to this colleague because he is part of my family or my race or my nation or anything. Anytime we've seen Garibaldi talk about loyalty, it's been this like, I have a personal relationship with you, and that is what matters. I don't care if you're an alien or human or anything else. I just care that we personally have this bond. And I think this is sort of the key difference between Bester and Garibaldi here. Bester doesn't do personal bonds. He assumes every telepath should be on his side because telepaths are clearly superior. And if that doesn't work, he assumes all humans are on the same side because we're all on the side of Earth, right? He has this very nationalistic or race-based thinking about all of this, which just doesn't track for Garibaldi.
Yeah, but also makes sense if you feel that best meant that what you said there quite literally, which I would meant exactly sure, because actually just his words that like, my blood is red as well could also mean like, actually we are both just, it could be a metaphor. It could be a metaphor where, we are both just cops, just different kind of cops. It could meant as a metaphor. It could be not literal. And I think that's interesting because that would then also make a better connection to what I have said in the beginning, also to what Sinclair said in the beginning. So you can be a good cop, you can be good at your job, or you can have, determination, or you can have strong morals. And it is sometimes there are situations where it is the most important question also of how you will be remembered, or how successful you will be, or what kind of consequences your actions have. Um, how you use these skills and whom you pledge your legacy to, like you can't just say in whatever situation you are being thrown into, like, yeah, watch, I'm not, like yeah, I had my orders, I just fulfilled my orders. I didn't have any more responsibility. I was just doing my job, or so pledging your loyalty can be like can be a bit difference. And I think the point for Bester there is that he wants to question how big the difference is in the hope to in the end really not from Garibaldi or from the next person win a bit more loyalty over. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think I lean initially more towards the literal, interpretation of the bloodline, everything else, because Bester has this recurring theme of at least we kept it out of alien hands when he talks about dust and stuff. But I mean, both of these things can be true at the same time. I definitely think Bester has more of a, you know, race nationality based thinking when it comes to loyalty. But I also think on the more metaphorical level of talking about what positions mean, there is some truth to that. Like, I don't think there is necessarily a contradiction here.
Yeah.
This whole investigation, I mean, yeah, you already mentioned it's ultimately, obviously, Psycho that manufactured dust. All this plan backfires. We can leave this on a side for another day because we know Bester is gonna be back, right? That's not a secret. He is a well-established recurring figure now. So let's talk about why this entire dust crisis is happening. Because even though dust is manufactured by Psycho, it's still legitimately the case that it's a drug problem that's being trafficked around the station, and there is a particular reason for this. Jakar has tried to procure some. Anything on that?
A lot on that actually, because there was an interesting piece of trivia in there which I have actually forgotten about, and I also think I've discussed in episodes before. I was out having that in mind. I had forgotten that there once were nine telepaths, to be honest. I had always now dealt with nine as this. I mean, also having the bigger world building in mind. Spoil here, anyone who knows why telepaths exist in general. I had always had the nine in mind as this people that never got to that point of getting telepath. And it blew my mind right now to hear that they had telepath, and I was wondering how and why and when they got them, and also wondering in which state of what kind of conflict they all got killed. Like that literally was something that I'd forgotten.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we are also getting further into the parts of Babylon 5 that you haven't seen as often as the very beginning, so it makes sense that more things are actually new, which is cool.
Yeah, so you knew all of this time when I was talking nonsense and didn't bother me. Right.
Because but I mean, this is something that is always true about this podcast, especially if we're talking with Meike. Like, obviously, there's going to be assumptions that are wrong, but like, what's the point of then saying, yeah, but that's not what happens, so let's not have a discussion about this, right? It's still interesting to have these discussions, and I think otherwise we are just recounting what happens in the story. That's a bit boring. We don't need that. So no, I think it's perfectly fine. And we will like step by step learn about this, and we can adjust accordingly what this tells us maybe about how we think about the origins of telepaths and stuff like that. That's fine. We do learn a lot more about the Nanarn in general in this episode, partially because Jakar just really feels the need to educate the weapons dealer and drugs dealer that he's dealing with, which I find kind of fun. But then also obviously in his flashbacks, we heard him talk about what the oppression was like. We see a little bit more of this now. Do we think he ever actually had a plan to procure dust in larger quantities, or is the entire story he feeds this weapons dealer about trying to bite for the resistance just an excuse to get some dust himself?
I think it's hard to tell because I think that's also the third option that he actually had the plan to get more dust and also maybe had promised someone at home to get more dust. And after his own experience, it's like, that's a very bad idea, you know?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of why I'm asking this question, because very clearly this is a big turning point for Jakar, and I'm just wondering, without the whole epiphany that he's having, what would his path have looked like going forward? Because he's changed a lot now with what we see at the end of this episode, but at the same time, he already was a kind of thoughtful and interesting leader before this point. So I don't know if I yeah, I'm just wondering how much of this epiphany did he expect? Did he always expect that, oh, if I take some dust and I get to talk to Londo, I will learn something that will change how I do everything? I wonder if he had some idea on that or not.
Well,
But we also don't have to speculate about that. We can talk about what's actually happening, which is him going on a wild rage, trashing his room, getting all scary, blackened-eyed, and making his way to Londo and Veer. There is this little.
yeah, I mean, it kind of makes you wonder how weird did non-telepaths behave in general? I mean, okay, other than the normal humans that took the drug did not behave like normal telepaths, but yeah. I mean, I was just wondering because there was a flashback with a another episode where we had this like this homeless human that was a telepath that looked into a non-mind and could not deal with it at all. So I was just wondering what does it do to a non-mind telepath because it looked rather intense.
Yeah, like every time we touch on non-telepaths, they are more strange and more alien than, for example, the Mimbari telepaths we see. They seem to be like very compatible with what Bester does and stuff. So yeah, that's definitely something. And maybe this. I have some theories what this might mean. Like maybe telepaths keep getting more refined as they evolve naturally or not, or something like that. And maybe what the Narn had is a more primitive version of that, or so. I don't know. But it would be interesting topic to go further into. Um, Jakar arrives at the quarters. There is this little scene there of Veer giving his report on what Minbar is like, and Londo sort of proofreading it. I don't know if we have much to say on this. My 2 cents would be that Londo is again like paralleling Earth Force really well, because everything that he does of like twisting words and twisting the meaning of something is all textbook from writing a new dictionary that Voices of Authority gave us. So it feels very in line. We're continuing this theme. This is what Centauri are also doing. But did you have some like any extra thought on like Veer's experience on Minbar and how he describes it, or how Londo deals with that?
Oh, yeah, I think London is literally just protecting beer because I think if beer's actually like authentic experience would ever get printed, you would probably have problems.
Yeah, it's a very charitable interpretation of this, but yeah, definitely. I think uh oh yeah, yeah, yeah. The one line that the one part that I found really interesting for Babylon 5 to bring is Londo saying, oh, you can leave in the part about them being very spiritual. Everybody is afraid of that. Because Babylon 5 is really a show. I think it's another like nudge, nudge, wink, wink moment where Babylon 5 maybe says, listen, we know that in science fiction we love to portray religion exclusively as like horrible warrior cults and like weird mysticism, but just like straight up vilifying religious people is maybe also not a great look and a great thing to do. So I found that kind of fun. But yeah, this discussion doesn't last very long because Will gets thrown around by a very angry Jakar, and subsequently we get a lot of flashbacks and like mind vision in Londo's and Jakar said.
Was and yeah, I mean, what I found interesting was to observe Chikara to see how that actually got to him because for we see that scene where Londo is actually shocked that so many Nine died, but then it also totally goes wrong again because then he also finds out that it was Londo who joked about destroying the non-home world. So yeah, but maybe we can also, before we discuss that, maybe come back to this parallel that I've drawn between this, also between this Bester and Garibaldi plot and also this citation of Sheridan in the beginning. Because I think they are both kind of in similar situations. They have the kind of I mean they have the same position, just one of them for nine and one of them for sorry. So they have all of these parallels, and now they are in this like weird mind plot and have to kind of they mirror each other in this plot, and I think that's rather interesting actually, because I think both of them are kind of exposed to the similarities that they have. They are literally just sitting on the same table but on different ends. And I think it's at least Jakar I think realized that. Um especially in the conversations with his father, where his father tries to teach him that it's not so important anymore who started it, but it's important who suffered. So yeah, kind of putting them both into the same position of or at least I think I interpreted that scene as a scene where there was this question of who can end it or who will end it first. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think like Jakar even like really highlights this reflection when he says, well, how does it feel to be helpless for once, right? He fully embraces this moment of, oh, I am taking now the role of the oppressor and now you're on the ground. And they're very much just like having their roles interchangeable in this moment. And
Yeah, yeah, but also yeah, it was a bit chaotic. It's like kind of chaotic scene actually. So I was just thinking, I think that yeah, I think it's not just the roles that are interchangeable, but I think that they also are, or at least for me, it looked, at least as if the implication was for guitar, it was clear that they also kind of share the same burden of responsibility of who can end this, like that, who they both kind of are the people who can end it, and then there's a question of how can it end.
yes, and I think a very compelling part is the one you mentioned is sort of this weak assertion. Well, but he started it, and finally having somebody a little bit more mature in the room who can explain, like, okay, that doesn't matter in this conflict at all. It will not. This is a great philosophical question that you can, write down your histories over, but it's never actually going to help somebody. The question is who's suffering right now, and what is your sort of historical righteousness worth if we are all just going extinct? And it's interesting for me to look at these quotes because on the one hand, I'm very excited to have Jacquard's epiphany about Jaquan and this teaching and, everything that he's going to build his life around. At the same time, we get at the very end also the reveal that this is Kosh speaking. And I wonder, how do I weigh this now? How much is this cautious priority? How much this is Jacquard's mind kind of coming to his own terms? And what's the value in here, right? Because yeah, it.
Um, I don't think that Kosh is standing there actually means that it of Kosh speaking. Like I didn't understand it like that at all. Actually, uh, we definitely know that Kosh observed it, and that Kosh is aware of what is happening. But just him standing there for me is not enough to actually imply that he also caused these images because yeah, if you are a first-time viewer at this point, you might think that that actually might be the case. But if I have a bit more of the like bigger world building in mind, I can also interpret it in a way that um, there are different ways of how these visions can happen, especially when you are in touch with this kind of fact that can like trigger this gene inside of you. So Kosh, it's hard to tell how much Kosh was involved in that or if he just observed. Because I don't think he necessarily caused everything that Jakar heard and saw.
Okay.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. Actually, I would really like to discuss this episode in the light of the bigger world building because a lot of things that I would like to talk about would be full of spoilers. So we're not gonna do that right now. But yeah, what would it mean for you if Quash did pause all of these images?
Um. No. I don't think we need to dwell on this, but for me it just casts a little bit of doubt on this. Also, I guess in light of what I think about the Vorlon in general. We've talked about this in the past a little bit, that I feel they have some questionability about them, and that's not going to change that easily. Um, but yeah, I think for me it's also just this element. We know that Narn, the holy book of Jaquan and stuff, has some real history in it. We know that the shadows are part of that. We know the shadows and the Vorlons are interconnected. And so for me it's just kind of this question, okay, what's the value of this as just a historical lesson and as like a spiritual lesson? How much is this, some outside influence? How much is this just Jakar on his own? And at the end of the day, I don't know that this is necessarily a super interesting question because Shikar suddenly doesn't seem to care about it. At the end of the day, like he walks away from this mission, from this vision, and has a very clear purpose in that. And how he arrives at that conclusion is maybe not even all that important.
Well, I think it is important, but I would have to say, and uh, yeah, without spoiling, without getting too much spoilers, I would have to say it's space magic. We can come back to it later, but I think it is important, and I think it's space magic, and I think it will matter later.
We'll have Londo walking away, and I think this is something interesting. When we think about you know Londo and Jakar as reflections of each other in this vision also as well, and in how it comes about. I don't know that Londo has the similar kind of epiphany as Jakar, but I think it is telling that the last thing we see of Londo after this whole affair is him being happy that Vir is there. And for all we know, not pressing charges for killing 500 Nan or something crazy like that it would have been in any previous episode. So I wonder if in this entire exchange there is sort of a Londo recognizing that something has changed in Jakar, and that ultimately leads to this very, very light prison sentence of, oh, you have to go 60 days into solitary confinement, given that this was very close to something like attempted murder.
Yeah, I think Jakar takes this vision that he had very seriously, and I think that in this vision, someone or something that we cannot talk about anymore at the moment asked him to not focus on how it began, but focus on how it can end. And I think, that's a change that we see here. That at some point it's not so important anymore of who killed more or of who started a war, but it's important that how exactly can end one. So yeah.
Okay. Then in this case, let's put a quick outro on this.
Okay, so now I'm allowed to say everything again. So yes, we are at Third Age Podcast. You can find us on Twitter, on Blue Sky, on Mastodon, and on Facebook, where we have a discussion group. We're not super active there, but you can use it, so please join and use it. We're also on Instagram, and you can find us anywhere you can find podcasts. But of course, here on YouTube, we are the cutest because here you can see, yes,